Hello and welcome to Firstpost Spotlights, where we bring you stories that matter to you from all across the world. From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, we shed light on issues that shape our world. I am Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. Let's begin with the top headlines. Russia says there are no plans for a call between President Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin after the US leader warned he might approve sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. China's soybean imports hit a record high of about 13 million tonnes for the month of September. This comes even as the country avoids US supplies amid a resurgence in trade tensions between the two countries. At least 42 were killed in a bus accident in northern South Africa, including workers from Malawi and Zimbabwe. President Cyril Ramaphosa expresses profound sadness and calls for focus on road safety campaigns. The United Nations says about 300,000 South Sudanese have fled the war-torn country this year alone. The UN also flags 2025 as the worst year of violence in South Sudan since 2017. And a trio from the US, France and Canada win the Nobel Prize in Economics for work on technology's impact on sustained economic growth and the theory of sustained growth through creative destruction. Today we begin in West Asia, where hope and tears filled the air on Monday as Israelis and Palestinians waited for a moment that has been 2 years in the making. The release of hostages from Gaza and the return of Palestinians from Israeli jails. Families on both sides of the conflict watched and waited with heavy hearts yet soaring with hope as a historic US-brokered ceasefire finally reached its first milestone. Footage showed the freed captives smiling and embracing each other after their release, marking an emotional moment in the ongoing conflict. In Israel, families of hostages gathered in Tel Aviv's Hostages Square as they waited for news on their loved ones, held captive since October the 7th, 2023. Thousands of people cheered, hugged and wept in Tel Aviv as they watched convoys carrying Israeli hostages held captive in Gaza make their way back to home soil. Some held pictures of US President Donald Trump and thanked him for brokering the ceasefire. For many Israeli families, the moment was a long time coming. Some spoke to their sons for the first time in over 2 years as they made their way to meet Israeli troops in Gaza. Others celebrated alongside friends and family as news of the handover spread. Red Cross vehicles moved through Gaza City on Monday, carrying the first group of hostages handed over by Hamas. By the afternoon, all 20 surviving Israeli hostages had arrived in Israel.
אתה לא מאמין, חיים שלי, עזה תהיה בסדר, אין יותר מלחמה, אתם כולכם חוזרים הביתה.
כולם מאמי נגמר.
זהו, נגמרה המלחמה, אתם חוזרים הביתה, חיים שלי, אני אוהבת אותך. חיים שלי.
מתן, מאמי, נגמר המלחמה.
I am so excited. We see Elkanah on video, FaceTime. My sister talked with him and it's very exciting and she says he is on his feet. And he smiles and she says he told her, Mom, I am okay. I am okay.
And it's very exciting.
Now the released hostages will first undergo initial medical screenings at the Reem Field Hospital before being taken to fully equipped hospitals for comprehensive checks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah sent a personal message to the hostages, welcoming them back. According to the Prime Minister's office, the welcome kit includes clothing and personal equipment, a laptop, a cell phone and a tablet. Israeli Defence Forces dubbed the handover Operation Returning Home and shared names and pictures of the released hostages on X. On the other side, in Gaza City, streets were lined with rubble from buildings destroyed during years of conflict, yet anticipation filled the air. Residents and officials alike prepared to welcome Palestinians who were freed as part of this agreement. The exchange is part of a broader ceasefire agreement. Israel was earlier set to release 1,722 Palestinians, including 22 minors. However, the release list has reportedly been adjusted by Israel, reducing the number of Palestinians to be released by 4. Preparations were underway in Khan Yunis and Gaza City to receive the returning prisoners.
This war was waged for the sake of the prisoners, and God fulfilled our wishes despite all the pain and all the hopes, and despite Benjamin Netanyahu, Donald Trump, and others, and the whole world, the prisoners were released.
In the West Bank, released Palestinians were greeted with cheers and hugs. According to reports, among those on the list are high-profile detainees, including Hassam Abu Safia, a paediatrician and director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, and Marwan al-Hams, who was a senior Palestinian doctor and the director of field hospitals for the Gaza Health Ministry. The doctors were abducted last year by Israeli forces. However, reports say they will only be released if the overall released quota isn't met. Now, for the first time in over 2 years, all living Israeli hostages have returned home, and thousands of Palestinians await freedom. Yet, even as tears of joy mingle with the scars of war, the question lingers: can this delicate exchange signal the start of a lasting peace? Or is it merely a brief pause in a conflict that has already cost too much? Moving on, as Israel confirmed the release of all living hostages held by Hamas, US President Donald Trump touched down in Tel Aviv. President Trump addressed the Israeli parliament, and in his address, President Trump praised Prime Minister Netanyahu's wartime leadership. The president called the return of hostages as the start of a historic dawn of a new Middle East. This, President Trump added, marks the start of a period of lasting harmony for Israel and the region. 2 left-wing lawmakers were ejected from Parliament during President Trump's speech for displaying signs that said, "Recognize Palestine."
I want to thank them very much for that. Not only the end of a war, this is the end of an age of terror and death and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God. It's the start of a grand concord and lasting harmony for Israel and all the nations of what will soon be a truly magnificent region. I believe that so strongly. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
At the Knesset, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also thanked President Trump for the Gaza peace proposal, which he said ended the war. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel has now achieved amazing victories over Hamas and Iranian proxies in the Middle East.
We welcome you here to thank you for your pivotal leadership in putting forward a proposal that got the backing of almost the entire world. A proposal that brings all our hostages home. A proposal that ends the war by achieving all our objectives. A proposal that opens the door to an historic expansion of peace in our region and beyond our region.
Earlier, Trump was greeted at the airport by Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife Sarah, and the Israeli President and the First Lady. The leaders shared a warm handshake and a brief hug before huddling right on the runway for a quick conversation. In a break from protocol, Prime Minister Netanyahu joined Trump in the latter's presidential vehicle. Trump's visit comes with a promise of conclusively ending the Gaza war, which the Hamas-run health ministry says has killed over 67,000 people in the enclave. Earlier this morning, Tel Aviv's beachfronts turned into a stage of praise for Trump. The US president's face was sketched on the sand, captioned "Thank you" and "Home." The crowds in Tel Aviv were heard chanting "Thank you, Trump," as the first convoy carrying Israeli hostages crossed over into Israeli territory. And in Jerusalem, the pro-Trump sentiments quite literally reached biblical proportions. Towering banners comparing the US president to Cyrus the Great, the ancient Persian emperor celebrated in Jewish history as the liberator who freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity. But symbolism aside, the focus now shifts to Egypt, where diplomacy once again takes centre stage. Within hours, Trump and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi will co-chair a high-stakes summit in Sharm El-Sheikh, aimed at defining Gaza's political future and broader regional stability. Crucially, Hamas confirmed they will not participate. Iran, too, has opted out, citing Israeli strikes in the country back in June. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declined the invites for the summit, citing a period of Jewish holiday. Apart from them, more than 20 world leaders are beginning to gather in Egypt's Sharm El-Sheikh. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas will also be attending. Other attendees include French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Turkish President Erdogan, Jordan's King Abdullah II, the Emir of Qatar, King of Bahrain, Prime Minister of Kuwait, Prime Minister of Pakistan, and the foreign ministers of Oman and Japan. India has sent its Minister of State for External Affairs as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's special envoy. The Indian minister posted on X late on Sunday night, confirming his arrival in Sharm El-Sheikh. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, the Arab League's Secretary-General, and the President of the European Council will also be in attendance, lending institutional heft to the summit's ambitions. The world now turns its gaze to Sharm El-Sheikh with high expectations. But for now, hope and scepticism share the same table, and the coming hours will reveal whether words from the summit halls can truly translate into peace on the ground. For more on this, we have with us Victor Tricod, who is an Associate Director of Control Risks, joining us live from London. Victor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's first begin with Donald Trump's role in this deal. Now, we know it's been months, if not years, in the waiting. What do you think Trump's role exactly has been, and how has he influenced this deal? And is it right that he's putting himself front and centre, given that there are so many similarities between this 20-point proposal and one from Joe Biden?
So I would perhaps start by emphasizing the fact that, the plan is probably relatively similar to previous proposals that had been put in place. I think that the difference, however, is not so much in terms of the content of the proposals, but rather the type of pressure that has been applied and the credibility of that pressure. And at Control Risk, we've long been identifying US pressure as an absolutely key determinant of prospects for a ceasefire being implemented. That pressure was lacking for much of the past 2 years and never reached the thresholds that were needed to really push the process forward. But it appears that Trump finally, in the last few weeks, the most recent few weeks, did step up that pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, likely as a result, in part, of the strikes that Israel carried on Qatar in early September, generating significant instability in the region and significant concern among key US allies in the Middle East.
Yes, and Trump himself, speaking in the Knesset earlier, did also allude to support from other nations he didn't necessarily expect to help in these negotiations. But I want to look forward now and focus on this peace summit that's coming up. What's the significance, do you think, Victor, in the fact that there won't be Hamas or Israeli official representation at the summit? Does this undermine the peace summit itself?
That's a very good point. It does seem like initially no invitations were extended to either Israel or Hamas, suggesting that the primary intention of that summit was not to have the parties sat at a table, and instead suggesting that the intention of this summit was to gather the backers of the plan, so third countries, including the US, including France, including the UK, various Arab countries, to give further weight and really sort of express support for the 20-point plan as it stands at the moment. So you could probably see it as more of an early coordination stage rather than the actual substance of the negotiations, because as I'm sure much of the audience will be aware, that the latest negotiations have been phased, and what has been agreed so far is phase one, a relatively limited logistical exchange of hostages for prisoners, which achieves a ceasefire and is a major development. But now we're moving towards phase two, which focuses on the future of Gaza and the future of governance in the Strip. And that has major implications and will likely be a far more fraught process. And so gathering those backers, aligning on process, on timelines, and starting to ensure that momentum is there is probably the first initial point that is being achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh as kind of the first preliminary at this stage.
Yes, and Victor, let's build on that as we bring our discussion towards a close. Of course, so many international leaders and delegates that we've spoken about and listed are going to be present. We've also seen a successful handover of hostages, something where there was uncertainty and scepticism. Do you think this now is the throttle being placed firmly down on this deal being a success and a potential for lasting peace?
That's the million-dollar question. So what we've seen is very significant. It is a major development. It changes a lot of the dynamics and the status quo we've seen over the past 2 years of conflict in Gaza. So it is a major development, a very positive one, and it's worth emphasizing that. Now the obstacles that remain are also sizable, and Israel hasn't formally promised or agreed to withdraw from Gaza. Hamas hasn't agreed to disband. There is extreme uncertainty around what the future governance of Gaza will look like. And so in the first stage, if the backers, as I was referring to them just earlier, can keep the momentum going around, notably and perhaps most importantly, agreement on an international stabilization force that will constitute a very significant further development, lending greater stability to the current ceasefire. In terms of the, very long-term implications of this decades-old conflict, it's really far too early to say. But yeah, the key determinant for stability that we'll be looking at here is certainly a swift implementation of the international stabilization force and its remit being applied in Gaza the soonest possible timeframes.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, questions remaining, but positive momentum. Victor, thank you ever so much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Moving on from the Middle East now. Afghanistan and Pakistan are facing renewed tensions following deadly cross-border clashes along the disputed Durand line. Heavy border clashes erupted between Afghanistan and Pakistan late on Saturday, leaving dozens of troops dead on both sides. The violence marks one of the worst flare-ups since the Taliban took control of Kabul back in 2021, plunging bilateral relations to a new low. Afghanistan's Taliban forces launched coordinated attacks on Pakistani troops along their shared border on Saturday night. Kabul described the assault as retaliation for airstrikes it claimed were carried out by the Pakistani army on Afghan soil on Thursday. Pakistan, however, did not directly acknowledge the airstrikes, but maintained that it had the right to defend itself from growing cross-border militancy originating from Afghanistan. A Taliban spokesman said that 58 Pakistani soldiers were killed and around 30 others wounded, while Afghanistan says it's lost 9 of its fighters. Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi, speaking in India, later declared the situation is under control and that their operation had achieved its objectives before a ceasefire appeal from Qatar and Saudi Arabia was accepted.
तो हमारे दोस्त ममालिक जैसा कतर और सऊदी अरबिस्तान उन्होंने ख्वास्ता उन्होंने तलब किया कि अभी जंग रुकना चाहिए तो हमारे तरफ से जंग रुका हुआ और अभी हालात कंट्रोल में हैं तो हम अच्छा ताल्लुकात चाहते हैं। अच्छा रात जो 4 घंटे हमारे तरफ से जो इंतकामी ऑपरेशन हुआ तो उन्होंने अपने अहदाफ को हासिल किया और जाहिर है कि हम ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा इसका ख्याल रखता है कि इस सिलसिले में आवाम को नुकसान न पहुंचे।
US President Donald Trump offered to mediate while departing for his visit to Israel shortly after brokering the Gaza ceasefire.
This will be my 8th war that I've solved. And I hear there's a war now going between Pakistan and Afghanistan. I said, I'll have to wait till I get back. I'm doing another one because I'm good at solving wars. I'm good at making peace. And it's an honor to do it.
Meanwhile, Iran on Sunday urged restraint as tensions between the neighbours escalated. Tehran also said it stood ready to mediate between Pakistan and Afghanistan, emphasising the need to respect each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Afghan officials further alleged that Thursday's Pakistani action was an airspace violation, insisting that no major damage was caused, but vowing to defend Afghanistan's sovereignty. Islamabad, on the other hand, offered a sharply different account. The Pakistani military said 23 of its soldiers were killed, while more than 200 Taliban and affiliated fighters died in the clashes. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned what he called provocations by Afghanistan, warning that every provocation will be met with a strong and effective response. Meanwhile, Pakistan's foreign minister said the country expected the Taliban government to take concrete measures against what it calls terrorist elements operating from Afghan territory, warning that such acts could derail bilateral relations. The Chaman border crossing, a vital trade route between the two countries, remained closed for a third straight day, leaving hundreds of Afghan refugees stranded and halting all cross-border trade.
We are stranded here because of the war. People say there is fighting at the border. Children, women, and the elderly here with us are sick. There is no water or food. We don't have enough money to survive here for even a few days. They should resolve their issues through dialogue. In war, both countries lose. No one benefits.
Islamabad says the Pakistani Taliban, also known as the TTP, operates freely from Afghan soil, blaming its insurgency for killing over 500 people this year, including hundreds of troops and police officers. The Taliban-led government in Afghanistan has repeatedly rubbished these allegations, adding that some groups in Pakistan are trying to worsen the situation. The Taliban says it has a right to keep its territory and borders safe. The weekend's border violence has once again highlighted the fragile peace between these two neighbours, with key crossings sealed, trade disrupted, and trust at its lowest point in years. Both sides face mounting pressure to return to diplomacy over confrontation. Moving on to tensions simmering between China and the Philippines. In the latest, the two countries have accused each other of causing a maritime clash near disputed islands in the South China Sea. Manila said a Chinese Coast Guard ship rammed and used water cannons against the Philippine vessel near Thitu Island, while Beijing blamed the Philippines for illegally entering Chinese waters. The Philippine Coast Guard said the incident happened on Sunday morning near Thitu Island, known locally as Pagasa. 3 Filipino government vessels were anchored near the island to help local fishermen when Chinese ships reportedly approached and used water cannons to drive them away. Minutes later, one Chinese Coast Guard vessel reportedly fired a water cannon directly at a fisheries bureau ship and rammed its stern, causing minor damage but no injuries. The Philippine Maritime Council condemned the reported attack and called it an aggressive and illegal act. It said Manila would take appropriate diplomatic action against Beijing. The Philippines Foreign Affairs Department confirmed that a formal protest would be filed. Photos and videos shared by the Coast Guard showed a Chinese ship shadowing a Filipino vessel with its water cannons activated. The Philippine Coast Guard said it would not be intimidated or driven away from its own waters. The US ambassador to the Philippines also criticised China's actions, calling the ramming dangerous and aggressive. Washington reiterated its support for Manila under the defence treaty between the two partners. Meanwhile, China's Coast Guard blamed the Philippines for the confrontation, saying 2 Filipino government vessels had illegally entered Chinese waters near Sandy Cay in the Spratly Islands, and said the Philippine ship ignored repeated warnings and dangerously approached a Chinese vessel, which led to the collision. A Chinese Coast Guard spokesman said that full responsibility lies with the Philippines and urged Manila to stop what it called provocative actions. Beijing maintained that the area falls under its sovereign territory despite Manila's objections and an international ruling that invalidated China's claims. The South China Sea has been a flashpoint between Beijing and Manila for years. The latest clash near Thitu Island followed a series of similar confrontations, including a water cannon attack last month near the Scarborough Shoal, which injured a Filipino crew member. According to reports, in August, a Chinese Navy ship collided with one of its own Coast Guard vessels while chasing a Philippine patrol boat near the same area. China took control of Scarborough Shoal in 2012 after a long standoff and has since increased its presence in the region. The incident is the latest in a series of disputes between China and the Philippines in these contested waters. For now, both sides continue to trade accusations as calls for restraint and dialogue grew louder. That's all we have on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.
From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, shedding light on the world's top headlines, detailed analysis on the stories that matter the most to you. Catch it all on Spotlight at 6 p.m. India time and 12:30 GMT, only on Firstpost.